Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, The Future of the Digital Library, Leveraging Digital Content in an In-Person Learning Environment, which is sponsored by BibleU. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. All of the attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are disabled, so don't worry about generating noise or feedback. That's all taken care of. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. We'll be using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our presenters. The audience for this presentation is large and we expect many questions, so we might not have time for all of them, so we apologize ahead of time. But we will answer as many questions as we have time for. So please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A as they occur to you, and our speakers will answer them throughout. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions that you like. There's also closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom right corner of your screen. Also note that we're recording today's program and everyone who registered will receive a follow-up email with the link to the archive version. And with that, we're ready to get started. So over to you, Brian.
Awesome, thanks, Sabrina. We can just skip to the intro slide. With the, we go to the slide with the panelists, sorry. Great, so I'm Brian Cami. I'm a Senior Marketing Manager, Growth and Strategy at BibleU. I will be moderating today, so attention will not be on me. It will actually be on our other two panelists. So with that, I'll give it to Susie to introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Susie Kopecki, and I am a librarian and associate professor over at Allen Hancock College on the Central Coast of California. And I'm excited today to talk about some of the digital initiatives that we've been involved with over the past year and a half and beyond.
Hi, I'm Lauren Magnuson. I'm head of collections delivery and access at California State University San Marcos in San Diego County, which is located on the traditional homelands and unceded territory of the Luiseno and Payam-Cowichan people. As a guest on these lands, I take seriously my responsibility to use resources wisely and to work toward equitable access to information and build collections that are representative and respectful of the diversity of our students and the people of our region. So a lot of what I'll talk about in the presentation might be procedural and talk about workflows and that sort of thing, but driving all of the work that we do is really to build those collections that are accessible and are equitable for our users. And as head of collections delivery and access, I work in support of library acquisitions, metadata, and resource sharing. So I'm really happy to be with you all today.
Awesome, yeah. So just to quickly tell you guys what BibleU is, we're a learning enablement platform that works to deliver content to students through institutions. On the library front, what we've helped in the US is working with institutions to provide digital textbook reserves, helping get access to some of those really difficult to get e-textbooks in a more affordable format. We launched it obviously during the pandemic when there was no ability for students to get their in-person textbook reserves so that they can still access the content that they need. Go to the next slide. We work with over 2,000 publishers, have over 2 million different learning assets, so that's publisher content, open educational resources. By being B2B, we have lots of lower in content prices, and we do a lot of integrations to help simplify, to help with cost avoidance. And so with that, that is the very quick, what is BibleU? If you have questions and ever want to learn more, you can go through our website or reach out to me directly. But without further ado, let's move into the panel discussion. So the first question I have for the two of you is, let's go back and think about the beginning of the pandemic, and when you had these print and in-person services that you needed to reinvent or continue in this confusing digital environment. So what did you do to manage that? How did you go about that process? And what were the most successful initiatives that you had? Susie, if you want to start us off.
Sure, I'd be happy to share that. As as I think is true with most other libraries, it was not something that we planned. So we had to have a very brief, full shutdown. Luckily, it occurred during spring break, so we were not on break. We were working, getting ready. So the physical shutdown of the building was actually very brief. We quickly moved to, can we scan some items? What books do we have that we can just fully check out to the students in a safe manner? Um, we were very lucky because in the spring, some textbooks became available through Red Shelf and Bookshelf. So that helped a lot of the students who had been relying heavily on our print course reserves. And our course reserves are the highest circulating collection in the library. These include textbooks and other supplemental materials that are used as the course adopted texts. Or suggested readings for the courses. So we wanted to make sure the students were not feeling that they could not complete their coursework. So we did a little bit of scanning. We also, it inspired us to start using the catalog to have students directly place requests and place holds, which has actually been very helpful for streamlining processes as well. Before that, students could use the older catalog. They could log in. It wasn't as elegant of a process. We definitely have made it, I think, much more accessible for students now. Other ways that we expanded to make sure that we were reaching as broad audiences as possible included expanded our in-person orientations to include Zoom orientations. We also created an online orientation for our distance learning asynchronous courses. So it's always fun when we get chat questions where the students are saying, I'm working on the online orientation, and we gamified it, which was something we'd been wanting to do for years. So it's like they're playing a somewhat retro video game, but they're also learning about the library. So we were very proud of that. And another big move was that we subscribed to more digital content providers such as BibleU, which has really been a game changer for making sure that students have access in some format to their course textbooks. We also began working with Swink Digital Campus. This was to help replicate the instances, especially for film courses and English courses, where students were required to watch a film or a series of films. And before the pandemic, they could come to the checkout desk and check out a film for 2 hours, or they could borrow it if it's in the collection. But now there's a way that instructors can digitally share these films with the students, or students can watch it at their leisure at home. We also added more to the digital vendors that we had already begun working with, such as Overdrive and others. We expanded those offerings. Before that, we had been slowly working on trying to make it more balanced between the print holdings as well as the digital holdings. And we felt that maybe there was a little bit of resistance because anecdotally, when we would ask students, we have this book digitally, we have this book in print, what do you prefer? And often the response was something along the lines of, I want a real book. So over the last year, we've also, I think, made some big strides in having students say, I'm okay with a book either in digital or print format. They're both equally, they're both equally valid sources.
Thanks, Susie. Lauren, do you want to jump in there and share your experiences just to help set the stage?
I do, but there's a really good question in the Q&A that I also have the same question for Susie. What platform did you use to create your online library orientation to gamify it? That's such an awesome product. So I want to hear the answer to that also, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. We ended up using, I believe it's hosted on Google Docs right now, and I can find the link and I can put that into the chat. And we have 3 different modules, and we worked with our campus graphics department. We were inspired because, well, years and years ago, when I was brand new, we had this amazing librarian who has since retired. We keep trying to convince her to come back because she's so good. And it had been her dream for the longest time to have this, let's do this fun interactive library orientation, outside of the box. And at first, it was actually going to be an in-person thing, and we are talking about, having this cool like retro passport design, and you get a stamp whenever you learn about the reference area or learn about this, and or a cool little suitcase design. And eventually, we decided, oh, it'd be neat if we shifted that online. And we saw a couple of examples. At least one is no longer available, or it's no longer working. But we saw a few examples of other libraries that had done this gamification. And we thought, oh, this is the dream. We'd love that. And we just never seemed to have the time, as I think is true for most of us. It's, there's always something to do. And we had instructors who were saying, I teach only DL classes. How do I get this orientation? And we would, we'd still try to offer, extra credit opportunities if the instructor wanted to do that. We would come, we'd make recordings. But now we have instructors who are teaching distance learning courses, and they specifically do assign the modules to the students, and students seem to like it. They get I think they get a badge at the end, or they get a certificate of completion. Yeah, I'll look for that link and put that into the chat.
That is so awesome. Yes, I'm very much looking forward to seeing that, and it sounds super fun. So that's such a great way to engage students. So I just, in terms of the original question, I relate to so much of what Susie said. Reserves absolutely has really been sort of the center of thinking about our services and how we can deliver things. When campus physically shut down in March of 2020 and the library closed, we really immediately felt the impact for students who had been relying on our physical reserve services. And we were getting hundreds of questions a day about, I was using the textbook, but it was available on reserves, and now I have no way of accessing my course materials. And that was actually, I think a lot of, I don't think we realized in the library how many students relied on that service. And then now it's something that we use when we kind of talk to faculty about, that situation and how they became aware of the fact that their students were not buying the book, right? For a lot of faculty, that was maybe the first realization of like, oh, students aren't actually buying these books. They're relying on these other ways of getting access. So just like Susie mentioned, like Red Shelf, a lot of vendors immediately did provide some free access to get through that semester. But then post that, grace period that vendors were opening up a lot of access, then we did, of course, we also signed on with BibleU. We've, really looked at how can we provide access not only through the ebooks that we were already buying, but through all the rest of the semester for all the resources that are from the publishers that we traditionally cannot purchase in our reserves. So the question asked a little bit about kind of thinking about print in-person services and what we did during the pandemic to provide access to those. We did implement a touchless locker system, and then we also mailed items to our users' homes. So we had been doing that through interlibrary loan for years. We would have students who were studying abroad or remote students who were taking their classes fully online even before the pandemic. And you could request materials to be mailed to your home. And so immediately our ILL staff modified their forms to be able to capture the best address. We didn't want to rely on whatever campus thought your address was, because during the pandemic, people were living in places that they didn't tell us originally that they were living in. So we captured that at the time of the request. We worked really heavily with our mail services, which is amazing. Our ILL department was even able to get prepaid mailing labels included with the books that we sent out, so that students could return their materials through the mail without having to pay or kind of figure that out. And I think that was really key to getting the things back, to be quite honest. If we hadn't done that, I don't know that we would have seen that. And I just want to mention, I have just a quick graphic here to share that kind of looks at what happened to physical circulation during that year. So this graphic shows sort of pre-COVID, right, 2018 to 2019, before COVID was even a thought, we had about 20,000 physical circulations, and a big portion of that, of course, is reserves and media. And then when in the year that COVID began, where our building closed in March, we have this kind of proportional drop, I think, in circulation. That's a result of just basically no circulation between physical item circulation between March and June of 2020. And then when we were closed the entire year last year, we still managed to circulate 1,000 items, which I think is actually surprising. And you can see a little aside there about how we did that. We did it through the locker pickup and our mail to home. And just a caveat, the lockers became available in October. So overall, users, if you look at the whole year, we had 80% of the items that were checked out there, that 1,100 number, were mailed. But once the lockers got introduced and people started getting used to them, it was about a 60-40 split. And really toward the end of the year, it was about 50-50. So those lockers and mail to home were an important mix and will continue to be an important mix going forward. I think even as now we have students back on campus, but we're still mailing items and we're still seeing locker requests and locker pickup, because you can go pick up those items 24/7 out of the locker that's outside the building. So you can just come up and check it out. So just some data there to kind of illustrate how we did it, and then some of the things that seem to work pretty well.
Lauren, we're trying to get lockers now, so I'm so interested in hearing about your experience with them. We've been so excited. I know there have been some delays in transit, so it's been like a year in the making. But so you said that the students really enjoyed it and they're still enjoying it, and it's something you intend to use long term?
Yeah, it's really been a good service, again, because of that. We have so many students who can't come to campus during the, even the hours we're open. We're open pretty late at night, but, on weekend hours, and there's just many students who can't make it to campus until 10 o'clock at night, and that's totally understandable. And so they can request that item put in the lockers and come, anytime, and they don't touch the locker. And I will look up that locker service and company, and I'll put that in the chat with some information about the model that we have also. Because it was a bit of a learning curve for sure, but it does integrate with our system, which is Alma, and students, and it's pretty seamless in terms of the requesting and how they pick up the items. And so far, we only have one locker kind of bay, but it hasn't filled. It hasn't, gotten to the point where there's too many things in there and people aren't picking them up, although there is functionality to kind of deal with that situation. Like, it alerts you when something's not been picked up for a few days, because it knows, right, if the door's been opened. So it's a pretty great system. And like I said, I do think even though we've got students back on campus for a variety of reasons, the students can't come when our physical building is open, it's still going to be something we're going to continue offering as an option basically indefinitely. And I'll put that information in the chat as well.
Yeah, you've both jumped on what was my next question, which is which of these initiatives do you think are going to continue? Because obviously some of the stuff you did was not meant to be a long-term solution oriented. It was just meant to put a band-aid on it until things could get back to normal. So other than, I know we've talked about the digital orientations for UCZ and then the locker program, or are there other initiatives that you are definitely going to keep running now that we're back in a more in-person environment for the time being?
Sure, and I think I'm starting this one. So I did see a question too in the chat about the use of the virtual services now that the school has reopened, and over here it seems the excitement for e-services is going down. I have seen that as well. We have seen this massive rush to be back on campus and to check things out. So just some early numbers from this school year. Last year we circulated 1,100 items through the lockers and mail to home. In the first 2 weeks of the semester, we've circulated 500 items. So like half of what we did the entire last year. And having those desks open is such a huge part of that. So those physical materials, I think Susie had mentioned this too, I think print is absolutely part of this mix, and the physical material usage is absolutely something that, as much as it might be easy to say, we'll just do all digital things forever, there's this physical material need, and I think especially reserves drives that a lot, that people are actually really excited to use our physical library more than maybe we ever thought they were. So that's been really good to see. And then I think in terms of the question about what we're going to continue doing. So one thing that we did to streamline how we got digital materials in the hands of our users that they needed. So we implemented what we call a digital on demand workflow. And we used our JIRA ticketing system to do that. And it basically enables our interlibrary loan staff to convert resource sharing requests into purchase requests. Alma, our library system, has some functionality that is meant to enable this, but we ended up using JIRA because, first of all, it was being used by our library IT department for tickets, for IT related tickets. So there was already some infrastructure set up. We already had licenses for that. And then it enabled us to have users, stakeholders in the library, so our reserves department, who might not be all up in our order records all the time and know how to track all of that stuff, because that's really difficult to do in our system, or our librarians who are chatting with the user says they need a book, we don't have it, they can put their request in through JIRA and not have to like navigate a bunch of complex screens in Alma and the backend system that they never get into. So I just wanted to share again really quickly. I have just a quick graphic to kind of show how these requests get routed from our ILL system. We use Iliad, and we also have even converted them from Alma itself back into a purchase request. So just really quickly, I'll show how that works. So the user requests a title, and when the library is physically closed, we would do this for everything, including things that we might have even had physically. If a user requested digital, we would buy a digital copy, even if we had that physical copy sitting on the shelf. So we got those requests routed into JIRA from our ILL department. And then we would, the ILL department is where our ILL staff are absolutely amazing. And it was this really cool way of looking at the request and seeing, who had a lot of digital holdings in WorldCat. And of course, the way that tends to result in the kinds of requests we would get, they tend to be like academic libraries buying ebooks. And so the kinds of things that we were buying actually ended up being these really awesome works that we really needed in the collection. So a lot of times we get requests and I'm like, I can't believe we don't have this book, like buy immediately, So we didn't run into issues of like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have that in the collection. Everything that the students and the faculty bought have been great additions to the collection. So in that JIRA system gets picked up by our acquisition staff, who then locate the best license. So we bought really permissive licenses. We continue to do that as much as possible. We were really lucky to get some additional budget for this from some CARES Act and some of the special funding that was made to higher education institutions in the United States as a result of COVID. So knowing that our instruction was all virtual, we did get some additional funds allocated to us, which has been really, excellent and essential for making sure that students have digital access to the information that they need. So acquisitions purchases the material, the license, metadata, the ticket gets assigned to metadata catalog, provide the link, and then email the user directly. And we've been able to turn around those requests usually in 24 hours. We had an example recently where from the time I think it was a faculty member requested a book to the time they got the email that their book was available was 2.5 hours. So that's like our fastest turnaround time that we've seen, but it can be really, really fast and students and faculty really love it. So now, of course, they're trying to figure out how do we fund this and keep it going past the pandemic as we return on campus, because it is still a really popular service. Even as I said, the print is really coming more back into the mix.
That's awesome. It seems like that's one of the main challenges libraries and everywhere around higher ed is facing right now, is some of the solutions that you want to continue from COVID. You can't, because the one-time funding for it is disappearing. But it's still really awesome work. Susie, do you want to jump in here?
Sure. And Lauren, I'm going to ask you later about that because that sounded so cool. I want to learn more about that and if we can adopt that. Yeah, there have been some really helpful changes, and I should probably backpedal for a second because I mentioned before that the library was only, full stop closed briefly. And by that I meant that it was only during the extended spring break of about 2 weeks when we would have been doing inventory anyway. But after that, even though the library services primarily shifted remotely, we opened a little part of the library, the lobby, that became a quiet study area. But other than that, for the past year prior to fall 2021, the library itself as a full functioning library was not open other than on the digital end and for in-person pickups as well as curbside pickups and returns. But some of the digital services that we began utilizing, we will continue to use. Definitely BibleU. That's become very popular. Students now know that they can check the library print holdings. If something isn't there, they will check BibleU, which we're really excited about. We're glad that students are open to different modalities. Swank has become popular. We are really happy that the students are also very good with adapting to using the library catalog, using Alma to make requests, especially for new things that they're picking up, like laptops. We have become really the home base for picking up a lot of technology now. So if students need Wi-Fi, if they need a hotspot, if they need a laptop, they're going to come to the library, they're going to place a request. If we have any left, and they'll come pick it up at the same time as any books that they've put in requests for. It's also nice because it streamlines, if students are wondering, oh, should I come to campus right now? Should I, drive, take that time out of my day? And then, oops, what if the material isn't there? So I think they're getting used to checking the catalog, which is really nice and I think beneficial for them. Once we get the lockers, we're looking forward to that as a long-term strategy, both at our main campus and at our satellite campuses. And I think, and also chat. Chat has been a big thing. So we've adopted the chat service. Our platform is Library Help. Help has the number 3 instead of an E. And we've had that since maybe 2000 and I want to say 15. And we were the only chat service on campus for a long time. A few other departments have now adopted that, which has been great because there have been other similar services where you can chat with someone. There's a service called, I want to say Connex Ed, where a good number of our campus entities were using that during the pandemic, but they saw that, oh, people really like this nice direct response. It's very, clear lines through library help. And we vastly expanded the hours. Before the pandemic, the hours of the chat only reflected the hours that the library building was physically open. As one of our measures to really make sure that students, staff, and community members felt that they were connected and they could still turn to the library, we dramatically expanded those hours. And we were really excited and surprised when we got approved for the hours we asked for. We said, how about, can we be open on chat till, from 6 a.m. till midnight? And they said, yep, go for it. So that also meant that we hired some librarians, we expanded those hours, and people use it. So it is not unusual for someone to send a chat at about 11:30 at night, or for someone told us recently, they said, thank you so much for being available early because, 6 a.m., 7 a.m., that's really the only time of the day that I have quiet and I can get that assistance. So this means a lot to me. We've had people who've said, how long are you going to have these hours till? Are they going away? And we've said it's our goal for them never to go away. So as long as we can get approval for the funding, we want to support you in every way possible.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was a student, you were never able to work during the times like during the middle of the day. That was rarely the time you were sitting down doing your research or trying to do your readings. So that's really amazing and valuable. We've already touched a bit on my next question. It came up in the chat, which is basically how prevalent was the digital use before the lockdowns for your library, and then what are the early indications of kind of the resettling of the balance? I know at BibleU we saw obviously massive spike in usage and interest during the pandemic, and it hasn't really slowed down for us. And we think part of that is, lots of people who've made the shift to digital. And if you, especially in the UK, where we're doing these campus-wide initiatives for being able to have all of your content in one place is highly valuable. And students where we have a print-on-demand feature, and students rarely use that when they get all of their content in one place. But wondering what it looks like on your campus on the ground, because we have a very high-level perspective.
Yeah, I'll be happy to jump in on that. Before the pandemic, I would say that the majority of the collection that is regularly circulating, used, referenced, was our print collection, but it was the digital materials as well as the usage had been growing, and it was really that skyrocketed with the onset of the pandemic. But we do think that students will continue to use those. Some of that is anecdotal in terms of just asking instructors, hey, are you getting a sense of if your students have preferences for the type of texts and materials they're using. We've also noticed more instructors from different departments have been reaching out to ask us if we can partner with them for solutions for the materials in their classes. One instructor recently reached out from the fine arts who wanted to know about, what kind of films do you have? Sent a link to one service, and we said, oh, thank you so much. We want to work with you. Have you seen this other film service that we're using? We've had others who have asked us, they're going digital for the first time. They've only taught in-person classes, and they're asking questions about access codes and is there any way for students to, how do I assign this to my psychology class or my physics class, my math class? If it's a book plus access code bundle, what can the library do for us? So we've talked about different solutions, and we've also been a big hub for OER, which we've been really proud of, that faculty have come back later and have said, hey, thanks for introducing me. We have an OER focused LibGuide where it lists some of the major sources to go to. We've had faculty who have asked to have print copies of the OER and course reserves, directly linked to it. In terms of digital, we're still having a pretty high usage of chat. We know that a lot of the students are extremely happy that we're back fully open in the library too. So we've seen some good access, but we also know that students are used to being able to access outside of just in person. So right now we're also talking about the feasibility of setting up like this perma open window for Zoom. So if someone wants to just walk in and they just want to talk on Zoom, or if someone wants to log on remotely on their phone, their other device, and they want to see someone's face, they don't want to just chat with us, they can click a button and it's going to launch the window and they can chat face to face with a librarian. So we know that those are going to be expected going forward, and we are excited about it. We don't see, unless our funding is cut dramatically, which, knock on wood, we hope not. We see that balance going forward. And one more thing is, we've also, something that really came to the surface was we realized that in the past we really only visualized the library as having two campuses, our main campus in Santa Maria and our secondary satellite campus in Lompoc. We have two other smaller satellite campuses, but we realized during the pandemic that really there's a third campus library, and that's the online library. So that's also where we're thinking we're going to permanently keep those longer extended hours. We want to make sure that it's also really this bastion of equity. We want to make sure that distance learning students are always going to have access to very similar or the same resources as their face-to-face counterparts.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of hitting that, and I hadn't heard that before. But the idea of the another library, really awesome. Lauren, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, and totally. I really love that conceptualization. That's not something that we kind of think of it that way, but we also had that same experience, Susie, of extending our hours and finding out that we're reaching students online through the chat services in ways that we weren't before. Through chat, I know our teaching and learning librarians are Zooming, opening Zoom sessions and finding that actually works a lot better for a lot of in-depth research questions. And so having access to support in that way absolutely has been very well used and is very popular. And I did see a question in the Q&A about how these are really intense virtual reference, and that people, I think, it sounds like other institutions are seeing that increase in demand for intense virtual reference. We hadn't funded any additional positions, but I think, we are feeling the stress of that and a lot of these other services. And I think I'm going to talk a little bit more at the end in terms of the challenges about just like feeling stretched really thin and how to avoid burnout. And not that we have all the solutions, but that's a real concern, is that we're finding these really popular services. And how do we do that, ongoing? It's one thing to maybe, work through the pandemic and do those long hours and do everything 120% for a shorter period of time. But as, first of all, COVID continues. And then of course, the demand for some of these things that we've innovated, it goes way up. How do we make that sustainable? So that's a really good point and a good question. We haven't seen additional positions, but it's a thing that we will probably need. So I'll just talk a little bit about, in terms of our the use of digital before COVID. We had some kind of interesting data. We had actually started our electronic reserves purchasing program in 2018, 2019. So that's sort of like that pre-pandemic year. COVID didn't exist. And so we did a project in 2018, 2019. Actually, before that year, our collection development policy did not allow us to purchase textbooks or assigned course materials. We had a specific, I think many libraries had these policies of collection development that said, because of our limited budget, we cannot buy textbooks, and certainly that's understandable, given, having to replace those new versions of textbooks every year. It's not remotely possible for tiny collections budgets like ours to do it. But as we were seeing more digital options that make it more affordable and more sustainable, then, it was time to revisit that policy. So in 2018, we did revise that, and we basically put into our collection development policy that students have the right to access course materials. And so looking at it as that equity issue of students not purchasing their materials because of cost, of course, results in worse academic outcomes. So in that 2018, 2019 year, we did a pilot to purchase digital materials, and I have a little bit of data to share from that, which then, kind of informs, and it's something to look at now that we're, thinking about how to make these services sustainable going forward. So this is some data from our initial pilot year before the pandemic, where we, for the first time, purchased textbooks. That might seem really silly for institutions who've been doing this forever, but it was really new for us. And we did purchase materials to make 29 courses, completely zero cost, so completely replaced the textbook cost. So students saved about $180,000 across those courses. And then we also found that, looking at that savings, every $1 that we spent on a digital book that was then accessible by all the students in that class, we only purchased unlimited user licenses, or enough licenses that would cover complete enrollment in the classes. So that's how we kind of tracked that. For every dollar we spent on those ebooks, students experienced $21 worth of savings. And then we know that those ebooks were used, just those ebooks that we bought in this pilot were used over 30,000 times. So we did have some kind of pre-pandemic data that shows kind of how prevalent digital was before. And so, we know that physical is going to continue to be a piece of this going forward. Ebooks, we cannot buy every ebook. We license everything that we possibly can, given our limited budget, and certainly with the limited COVID money that we have. We've done our best to meet that class, as many classes as we can. But then it's this long-term process of convincing faculty, right? Funding faculty, paying faculty, really, for all the work that goes into, if you want to change your course completely over to either an open educational resource, something that's available through the library, something that we can license. That's not a trivial ask for faculty, as we all know. So that's the long-term kind of strategy. We have these really effective kind of pieces of the puzzle, but trying to scale that and make sure that we can reach those classes that, maybe they'll never change their textbook, but how can we still make those resources affordable or accessible for the students who want to take those classes, but will never buy their books, because we know a big percentage of our students just don't buy them because they just can't afford them. And so given that reality, this is one piece of it, licensing ebooks that we can, like through BibleU or from other platforms where possible, we do that. But even though I think starting out in affordable textbook initiatives, which I've done for many years, as I started out, I was like, the library will provide all the books. We'll just buy all the ebooks And it's so easy and obvious. This is clearly the solution. And I've become more moderate in that position over the years. I'm still all about the ebooks we can license, but it's not necessarily scalable. It doesn't make sense for all faculty. There isn't an open resource for all disciplines and subjects. So the picture is very complicated. And so recognizing that and realizing that we're going to need staff and resources to further all of these goals is something that we can't pretend it's just going to magically happen with our wonderful ebooks, as great as they are. It's not a simple proposition for faculty to adopt those.
And just to totally support you, Lauren, we also, for the longest time, I mean, it was a dream to want to be able to somehow get money and purchase textbooks and then let the students borrow those. And it was actually written into it was either our academic policy or board policy that we couldn't use the district allotted funding to purchase textbooks. And I think that was because for so long our budget was so lean, and and really, the academic library, what is the purpose? It's to support the studies. We're going to get the supplemental materials. It's not supposed to be the primary repository just of textbooks where editions are changing, et cetera, et cetera. But that didn't mean that we still wanted to help the students, because librarians, we want to help in any way possible. So we were extremely excited because a few years back, right with the rise of OER, we had been talking with some of the administrative offices, including the grants office. And while we were having a conversation about OER, we were just talking aloud. And at one point, the former, I think, head of the foundation said, well, wait a second. If you don't, because they were under the impression that we did have a copy of every book on our course reserves. And we said, no, we definitely don't. We have some, but it's not exhaustive. And then that person said, well, how much money would it take? And which kind of floored us. And at that moment, I don't know, I put together a number. I said, well, probably at least, $40,000. And they said, okay, interesting. And they came back to us pretty soon after that and said, okay, you have $30,000 to start. Make me a list. And it took a really long time. But I was so excited. I actually missed a close friend's bachelorette party. That's how important this was to me. And I worked through it, and we had like a 30+ page Excel list with all of the books we wanted, numerous copies. And then we were able to get that, and that vastly expanded the course reserves. And then it turned out there was this other entity on campus that had their own informal book lending program, and their administrator was no longer interested in overseeing that and said, hey, can we give these to you? And we did eventually reach an agreement. So it was donated. And then again, we asked for funding. We said, okay, to keep this current and to be able to actually loan these books out to students for the entire semester, can we have X number of dollars? And then through writing grants, through finding support, we were able to do that. And that was a big way. That was a huge help during the pandemic too, that students knew even if they couldn't check out the hard copy of the course reserve textbook, and if we weren't able to digitize a textbook or we didn't have it to digitize, they knew that with this new collection, they could, put their request in and they can borrow their textbook. And it might seem kind of small, but something we were proud of was that before that, most of our collections, you could only check out for 3 weeks at a time, and then you can renew it 2 more times. And we were also able to go in and change it so that this separate collection within the library, students could borrow for the entire semester, because that had been, a point before of like, what's the point of checking out a textbook if I can't have it the entire semester? And we said, yeah, let's get out of that thinking and let's change it. Let's make it work for you. So, and then each year they have guaranteed that there will be funding to keep the collection current. We've noticed though that as word gets out, it's very popular, but we've also started to think about, okay, how many copies of the most high in demand textbooks can we get? Like, what's feasible? And then we have questions of space. Okay, if we have 50 copies of a book, realistically, how many shelves are we going to need? And then also, if 90% of the time, at least, 30 of those are checked out, how much space do we need long term? So some of the excitement and then questions that have come up for us, which if anyone else is mulling over a similar prospect, I hope that helps you.
I just want to say really quickly, that's such an amazing story about having those conversations in front of administrators and just like realizing, how the information that it just seems so, it should be known, right? And it just, when it isn't, and then maybe a solution can be presented. I know at a previous institution, we had a similar situation where I think our university president had come and just sort of casually mentioned, like, so you have one copy of every book that's assigned. And this is a massive university we're talking about. And you just have one copy, at least one copy, right, of every single textbook that's assigned across the university. And it was just like, whoa, we have a huge information gap that we need to fill with, our campus administration about what that would cost and what that would look like. But it's lovely to see, of course, that they're hoping that that is the case, right? And then how do we actually get the funding that we need? So that's such an amazing story, Susie. It's so good that you shared that.
Amazing. There's one question in the chat that I think relates to this pretty clearly. So it was wait, where did it go? Did it get upvoted? Yes, it did. Okay. So how did your libraries, did you invest in other types of digital resources besides ebooks, like primary source archives? Was the question.
Yeah, I know it was either through ProQuest or EBSCO. We did expand ours. I know they have archival collections, I want to say, of, is it Time Magazine, Life Magazine, and there was another one. So that was an e-archive we opened. Digital resources. Yeah, we are currently looking at expanding our journal holdings, our databases. We did expand them. This was even before the pandemic. We added expanded access to JSTOR. We added Nexus Uni. That was something where even before we had the funding, we we were kind of bold, and I guess we're lucky because we have a relatively we're very friendly department, which means that I guess sometimes we don't feel as stopped by this notion of silos. We'll just say like, oh, we need something. Let's go talk to that department. Why not? So we asked the business department if we could go talk to them, and we said, we don't have the money for this, but you want this database. Can we work together? Can you help us? And they supported, I think, half of the cost of Nexus Uni. I think we added a database having to do with administration of justice. We, yeah, our collections for Gale, the ebooks, we expanded that both in print as well as digital. And what else? Yeah, I think one of the silver linings definitely of the last year was when there was additional funding to try to make sure services were available to students. A tangible way was to increase these holdings and then get the message out to the instructors, who would then share it with their students. Sometimes they would assign, here's some homework, here's an assignment, and you're going to need to use the library to do that because, maybe you can't do something in person that we thought that you'd be able to do at the beginning of the semester.
And I'll just add in terms of our primary sources, we had a lot of the similar experience with Susie, and one of the things that we added a few Gale primary source collections, archives of sexuality and gender, political extremism and radicalism, and the American Civil Liberties Union papers. And those were specifically to eliminate textbook costs for a few courses that we're going to use those resources sort of as their textbook. So that's a really good option. I like that question about primary sources, as it's not always just a textbook that you can find the replacement for. It's maybe all of these other resources that faculty can put together in order to create assignments and structure their course around. And we also got a subscription to something called Visual Body for some kinesiology classes. It's like a digital anatomy resource. And so the difficult thing now, at least for some of those subscription resources, primary source things we own forever, but the subscription things is now that if we funded that with special funding because of virtual learning, it's going to be very difficult to either find the funding to keep that going or have faculty say goodbye to these resources that they have grown to love and rely upon.
And then just sticking with some of the other questions in the chat. And this is one that touches on something I think is very thorny in digital, which is copyright access. So from Valerie, how do you deal with special collections requests in the library and possible digitization of these materials in relation to copyright? which is a very thorny issue. And I don't know if either of you happen to be copyright experts, but it's.
So we don't have a special collections. I mean, we have a very small archive of materials relating primarily to the namesake of the college and his family that donated some materials. So we very rarely ever get requests in regard to those documents. And the digitizing that we did do, especially during the height of the pandemic, so our college president superintendent was very supportive, and we had these philosophical discussions of like, well, the library is the place to go get free and open access of information. We want to support the students. This is pretty unprecedented. What are we comfortable with? So when the superintendent said yes, do whatever you feel is right, and I will fully support you, go. So we figured out a way. We worked with our IT department to give only a certain amount of access to digitized text. So we had done a lot of research, and we were looking at, okay, what are some of the regulations? So we would encourage students, if you're looking for a textbook, first see if we have it in print, see if we have it through BibleU, see if it's available even through, the Internet Archive. Okay, if you don't have that, you can fill out this digitization request, but try to just request one chapter at a time, or maybe up to 2 chapters. And then if we had that, we would send them a link that had an expiration date. They could not actually download it permanently and keep it, but they could click the link, read it, and then after a certain number of days, access to that link would expire.
Yes, and we have a special collections unit, and I would not say I am the expert about copyright implications of special collections, but I do know that our special collections unit has been allowing users to place requests for usually an in-person appointment of some kind, which of course, now that the building is open, is facilitated, and we have COVID safety protocols in place. But similar to what Susie set up, which that sounds like such a great solution, and I think really starts to set up the infrastructure for something like controlled digital lending, right? Which I think is controlled digital lending is a way of taking your physical book and basically digitizing, in some cases, the entire thing, right? Theoretically, could be allowed in copyright to do that if that physical copy is not circulated, but your digital copy that you've made is circulated to one user at a time. It becomes sort of the analog, right, to your physical copy. And I think there's a court case right now in the U.S. With Internet Archive, who did some controlled digital lending through the pandemic, and so there's copyright concerns that are going to be potentially answered in the outcome of that court case that hopefully will allow libraries to use that system and consider that fair use, that if you have this physical copy but there's maybe either no way for a user to access that physical copy, or for a variety of reasons it would be more accessible to have that copy available digitally. And so I know that probably doesn't really answer the question in terms of the copyright concerns, but I know what Susie had said, kind of like, in that crisis situation, like do what you need to do. And I think a lot of institutions kind of went with that. And then now that we're sort of going long-term, figuring out something that would, something like controlled digital lending, that would sort of answer finally that we have fair use right behind us to lend those materials, I think would be really helpful. Yeah, okay, so are we still going through the Q&A? Because there was a couple in there that I thought we could jump on, or do you think there's one more question? I don't know if we're going to.
I think we've got lots of great questions in the Q&A, so I think let's just finish with those.
It's okay. I wanted to answer this question from Joyce about the justification for our no textbook policy has always been that publishers produce new editions every year, often with little change in the content, right? Which then requires spending so much money. Absolutely. That's 100% the reason why that was in our policy before 2018. So then how do you address that serious rational objection to purchasing textbooks? So totally right on, great question. One thing that kind of happens to work out is that the things that we can purchase digitally as ebooks that are being used as textbooks are not really traditional textbooks for the most part. So faculty do assign things that are published by academic presses, that are things like anthologies, there's lots of disciplines where the source material doesn't change every year, or the faculty doesn't, can provide updates in other ways by not necessarily choosing a textbook and then, continually purchasing basically that same textbook year after year with slight changes. So what that works out as, when we get the textbook looks from our bookstore, we look for publishers that we know are friendly to libraries, that we know we can purchase through, like Gobi, for instance, which is what we use. And then those tend to be, right, these books that have a lot of longevity. And so when we use that budget, we're really cautious of and mindful of the idea that if something is available in that as an unlimited license, it's published by a university press, it's from one of these publishers that tends to be friendly to us, that's a good investment in our collection because it's something that's going to have use beyond just one semester. And then the other piece of it is when we do have those classes that are using those books that are replaced every year, of course, then we can meet with faculty and try to convince them that there's an alternative resource that could be used in place of this. And then, of course, using other strategies like the fact that we can license certain books from BibleU and really targeting classes where we know that there's a lot of equity issues in those classes, intro-level classes, where the text is extremely expensive to the point where we know students are maybe dropping the class because they don't have access to the book. That's a way to then provide that access. So it's absolutely a tricky situation. There isn't a really perfect solution, but it just tends to be those ones that you can license in an unlimited, like DRM free. We do have faculty assigning those books, and those are the ones we feel good about adding to the collection permanently.
Yeah, and I think there was a question in the chat about, again, if you have a really limited budget, and there may be grants out there. I know a few years ago it seemed like there were quite a few OER related grants, definitely in California, but I suspect outside of California as well. And maybe, talking to someone in the grants office, they may have some ideas and they may be a really helpful resource with, getting the ball going on that. And that way, you don't have to devote your library budget to that. I know that it was a game changer for us when we realized that, oh, we could work with the grants office. We really didn't know that before. We knew that we could work, with the STEM grant on some things. We knew that we could work on the BSI grant for other things, but we didn't realize that, oh, we can just go out and see if there's a whole new grant that we can request money from. So.
And I'll just add, because the publisher relations element of things is really where BibleU does sit. What we're trying to do and constantly trying to do in the library space is help balance both interests of what the publishers need as they're creating these new copies while making them affordable and accessible for students through the library. So that is where we try to sit, and that we're constantly working to improve it from both perspectives.
I do see another question about from Joanna about the idea of accessibility and not necessarily requiring a lot of keyboard and mouse usage for users. Absolutely. And it brings up such a good point about, it's something that I've been considering, and we've had students actually have a lot of momentum behind platform fatigue, and even bringing it up as an issue for our faculty senate to address, because students are required now to use so many online platforms, which all, of course, should be accessible for all users and users with disabilities, but they may not be. And even beyond that, just having to use 20 different platforms across all your courses to log into your course for your learning management system, and then all these other ebook platforms. I think it's something that libraries should really be mindful of, and very difficult to do because of licensing restrictions, to say, we're going to intentionally limit the platforms that we're providing because things are not available on all the platforms, of course. But that's something that really weighs heavily on students to, each of their faculty members might say, well, I just have this one resource, or maybe just two. But then when you're taking 5 classes, then you've got 10 different platforms to log into, and they're losing their logins, and they're not able to access the content. And then beyond that, I think what Joanna's point is that just requiring so much navigation, learning all of these different platforms, and not accessible to users who are using assistive technology, all of those things are absolutely, I think, why approaching this sort of digital, if we're going to embrace digital, to do it cautiously and mindfully. And again, that's another piece of the additional work that we need to be doing if we're doing this work responsibly, that in many cases we're not staffed to do it, or we haven't added positions to prioritize this. And that can make it really difficult. And again, kind of that recipe for burnout of, not only are we purchasing the books and we're purchasing them at a much higher rate, but then we also have to make sure that we're evaluating the platforms responsibly and we're not purchasing things that students aren't going to find accessible to them. It's a lot of work, and it should be something that if administrators are listening, I guess, this is something that is so important to fund for libraries to be able to do that and to be able to make sure that the resources they're providing for students, all of the students can access.
Amazing, thank you. I think we're right about time, so I will be conscious of that. I will pass it back to Sabrina. I want to say thank you to both Lauren and Susie, and then tell everyone who's joined and people who asked questions. I learned a lot, so thank you all so much.
This is Sabrina from Choice and ACRL. Thank you, Brian, Susie, and Lauren for taking the time to present to us today. It's a really useful and valuable discussion, and thanks to everyone for sharing their own libraries experiences too. I'd like to remind our viewers that we recorded today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice with a link to the recording. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we would really appreciate it. Your responses help improve our presentations. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. I hope you learned something from the session, and we hope to see you again in the near future on another webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.